Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to our INSEAD Lifelong Learning webinar titled Strategic Thinking, the AI Event Horizon, which is extremely timely given the direction that AI has been heading over the last few weeks. My name is Kevin Pereira, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. By way of background, I'm an INSEAD 14D and the managing director of Blue Artificial Intelligence, a consulting firm that specializes in AI based out of Hong Kong. On the side, I'm also an adjunct professor at a few universities in Hong Kong and the larger Asia Pacific region, where I teach classes on AI for MBAs and undergrads at those respective business schools. We are very happy to have here today Professor Jason Davis, who is an associate professor of entrepreneurship and family enterprise at INSEAD. He is an expert on digital transformation and innovation in large enterprises, and also the strategies of startups in digital platform ecosystems. Jason earned his PhD and MA degrees from Stanford University and earned his MS and SP degrees from Caltech and MIT. He's also got a new book coming out titled Event Horizon Strategy: Enhance Careers, Create Business Value, and Avoid Industry Disruption with Generative AI. I think those subject areas are extremely relevant to our discussion topic today. And so without further ado, Jason, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone to the webinar. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I think we'll have a lot of fun. I think our goal is really to make it as interactive as possible. So please do save those questions. I know you submitted a number of questions. I think Kevin and I will have a good discussion. I was asked to do just a few slides here just to introduce and set the stage. So I will actually try to keep this somewhat brief. I don't think I should introduce myself more except to say that I've been here at INSEAD for about 10 or 11 years, always here in Singapore. Before that, I was a professor at MIT Sloan. Before that, I was at Stanford. Before that, Caltech. Before that, MIT again. So what you can probably infer from this is I'm a bit of a geek, and it is true. But most of what I do, I think, similar to Kevin, is I help people and organizations deal with digital technologies and think about the changes that they need to make in order to innovate. Here at INSEAD, I am director of a number of executive education programs, and I tend to work with large organizations, although I still do a few MBA classes as well. I think probably most recent claim to fame is I've been deeply embedded in the generative AI revolution, as I know many of you have been as well. I was lucky to be on sabbatical in San Francisco when the original ChatGPT dropped and saw the excitement happening there. Ended up doing a lot of research and writing a few cases on Tesla, robotics, OpenAI, and all the big techs. What are they doing? And also on Palantir. These three companies obviously have ended up being in the news a lot lately, but it was really a great experience and exposure to kind of thinking about AI in different perspectives, and ultimately ended up leading to the book. Some of you may know I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's where you can probably find my more spicier takes. So if you're interested there, I'm AI Agents Prof on Twitter, so you can follow up after. But as Kevin mentioned, it's not meant to be much of an advertisement, but I did want to let you know about the book. A lot of what we'll talk about today will draw on the book, and recently published, so you can get it wherever you tend to get your books. Here's a QR code for at least the Amazon listing. The goal of this book is to be very practical. If you're honest about how you write books as a scholar, some books are very scholarly. They're really for other professors. But what I wanted to do in this book is be practical and helpful. Mostly what the book is about, if I'm really honest, is use cases. It just documents use cases across many different industries, types of organizations, functions, or even different types of careers or occupations. So I was lucky to be spending time in various regions where AI was happening. So just tried to get as many use cases as I could documented there. And obviously that continues to evolve as well. So just to set the stage, just remember that AI actually has a long history, okay? And it means many different things. We're going to zoom in and focus on one type of AI today, but AI is very broad. It's any computer system that can perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence, right? Decision making, visual perception, speech, translation, all sorts of different things. When most people think about AI, I think they tend to think of this. They tend to think of robots, especially if you're a science fiction fan. Maybe you recognize some of your favorite robots, good and evil. We know robots can be good and bad, useful or sometimes unuseful. But what I hope to remind you is it's not only the robots, it's really the software, right? It's the software that enables them to be intelligent in some way. So probably what's very important to remember is that AI can mean many different things. It's not new. It has at least a 30-year history, but probably can be categorized into three big buckets. One is automation. So we've had a lot of automating software. Most of the web has some automation in the background, and this certainly has huge industrial uses. Then along came prediction. Now, when you hear machine learning, deep learning, its real first value was in being able to predict different outcomes. A lot of Web 2 technologies, targeting advertising, relied on prediction. Of course, the big revolution now is Gen AI or generation, the capacity of large language models in particular to be able to generate content. Right? And that's really been the revolution, is having such a large model that when you apply some inference is able to generate content of all different types. Of course, we mainly think of text, but I think we know the revolution actually really started with images, if you remember DALL-E. But images, videos, sound, computer code, any sorts of content that you could think of. So this is kind of a broad way, I think, of thinking about it. I think what I'm going to do is skip a little bit, because what I want to get to is really just a bit of a reminder of how fast this revolution has occurred, right? It has been remarkably fast. This is my favorite graph, the early days of ChatGPT, right? I think I've spent 15 years of my career talking about digital platforms, right? Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Instagram, Netflix. And we used to always say these were the fastest evolutions, right, that we really saw in digital technology. And then along came ChatGPT. We usually think of these as S-curves, but it almost puts a lie to the idea that it's an S-curve, right? It's so fast it almost looks like a straight line, right? An exponential takeoff. What this is here is the number of users, the number of days it takes to get to 100 million users. And you can see literally it happened, I'm sure you remember this, in a few months, right? Many of you, I'm sure, were early users, or at least people who tried early ChatGPT. And of course, this has expanded beyond ChatGPT. There are multiple large language models, but we're certainly in the billions of users at this point. Now, I want to remind you that's connected to technology in general, though. S-curves have been accelerating. Digital technology makes it possible to get faster and faster adoption. These technologies leverage each other, right? So we access ChatGPT through platforms, through computers, through internet, through electricity, right? We have S-curves building upon each other that just helps to accelerate those things. So in some sense, we shouldn't be surprised that it's so fast. Every new wave of technology is likely to accelerate if it takes advantage of digital. But it is incredibly fast. It probably wouldn't matter at all if it couldn't do something useful. In the early days, what did we see? We saw it able to perform at levels that were surprisingly close and eventually exceeding human capabilities. The best early examples were, of course, exams, because exams for becoming a lawyer, getting into grad school, getting into college, even these math and biology and chemistry Olympiads, these sorts of tests were objective. We had a lot of human data. We know what humans could do. So, of course, they applied large language models to these exact tests. Usually, the lesson here was that ChatGPT was pretty darn good, and then ChatGPT 4 blew us out of the water. And that has only continued to improve for many, many different types of tests. Now, we don't give it human exams anymore. We, of course, have much more sophisticated way to measure the intelligence and capabilities of LLMs, but this was just an early example. I think we all really took note. And maybe the last finding I want to remind you about, this actually comes from the study of medicine. Okay, so I can tell you my wife is a physician, and I remember sitting around the table with her saying, well, at least your profession, medicine, will never go away, because although ChatGPT might be good at diagnosis, it'll never have bedside manner. Well, and then this paper came out a week later. So I want to describe to you what this is if you have not seen it before. On the left-hand side, you see a chatbot compared to a physician in terms of the quality of diagnosis. And as you might expect, the large language model has virtually every medical study that has been incorporated into its large data set. So you might expect it is better than most doctors. And you can see these distributions here with the chatbot, which is ChatGPT in this case, much better than physicians. I think what was surprising to us, though, is the data on the right. They also measured the empathy of these responses. Now, these were text-based responses, but nonetheless, patients rated the chatbot as more empathetic than physicians, okay? Um, and it's an interesting finding. I think it shocked a lot of us until we started thinking about what is empathy? What are social interactions? What are the emotional and social interactions that we tend to have? These, in fact, are a content generation exercise, right? And embedded in these large language models is a lot of empathetic and unempathetic content from which it can learn how to do that appropriately, okay? So suddenly we needed to rethink everything. I think this was a bit revolutionary. We used to think AI is just about automation and, you remember the robots, Commander Data or the emotionless robot. Now we need to think, no, in fact, these are going to start to operate in the realm of social and emotional and human judgment, those areas in which we typically think of as just uniquely human. Okay. And of course, this led to a number of concerns, right? The concerns around what about me? What effect will this have on my job? Immediately in 2022, we start to see Google searching going through the roof about, will ChatGPT replace me? Okay. And I would say it's come down now, but I think there's still some concern about this that is still continuing over time. So, in fact, that might be one of the big questions that Kevin and I tackle. And in fact, I think a few of you actually asked precisely about that, the issue of jobs. It's a complex issue, a lot of complexities. The thing I will say is no one knows. I've read maybe 100 research studies about this. And I will tell you the truth, I think they're all guessing, they're all projecting, right? The technology will change. I don't think we can really know what's going to happen, but maybe we can take some educated guesses. We can start to think about different industries, different types of professions, and what the rate of change might be for those. So we can start to place some bets, but maybe none of us really knows. The final thing I want to say is this is far beyond ChatGPT in a single model or even just large language model foundational models. A very large ecosystem has emerged around Gen AI solutions. And I think you all know this, right? So while we often tend to talk about the foundational model producers, it's very interesting to see the horse race they're having. And I'm sure we're going to talk about DeepSeek and other events that have happened just in the past week. But please don't forget, this is a foundational technology that can be used by many entrepreneurs, many organizations, and many individuals in different ways. So we need to think very broadly, I think, and not just about the big techs or the LLM makers. Okay, I think I'm actually going to stop there because I wanted to make it a very brief but hopefully broad way of introducing this and hopefully open up our sets of questions. And I know Kevin and I have been chatting a bit offline, and I think we have a number of interesting topics to pursue. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I think I'll hand it over to Kevin. What are you thinking about these days, Kevin? What do you think?
That's it, Jason. No, thank you for sharing. I think you provided a good overview as to kind of where the AI kind of space is. And I think what I really liked about what you said was that you have on one side the technology piece, but on the other side you also have the human piece, right? And I think that's something that we need to talk more and more about these days, as I think people and AI start to work together. Like even from my perspective on the consulting side, being in the field, these are the types of questions people are asking now. So I think that sets the context well for our discussion today. So I guess, in terms of questions, I probably wanted to start first with maybe something a little, related to the INSEAD alumni kind of community that we have here. And obviously, compared to a lot of other business schools, we often see INSEAD folks going into multiple different industries, many different areas, maybe more so than other schools that have a specific specialization somewhere. So to cater to, alumni from different areas, I'm curious your opinion in terms of which industries and or functions do you think we're going to see more AI applications going forward? And specifically for companies itself, based on that, what strategies are they using to adapt to this sort of quick pace of change?
Oh, it's a great question. It's a broad one. I don't know if we can do it justice in in the hour we have, but at least let me start to open up and peel the layers of the onion a bit. So, of course, we're lucky at INSEAD. You're right. We have a very broad set of alumni working in many different industries and many geographies, and that diversity is really our strength. Honestly, it's really a wonderful, fascinating thing. Um, Probably we can have multiple cuts at this. Where will it have its biggest application? I would say it will have its biggest and earliest application in those industries and verticals which are about content production, because these LLMs are all about content generation, content production. So, of course, you see lots of different, we can take specific functions, for example. I think we know that marketing has been the earliest application for a lot of this. I think in terms of industries, I think we know financial services starting to have some huge applications for this, partially because financial services has always been early in innovating and adopting innovations, but partially because it's very natural to think about analytics from a content generation standpoint, because a lot of what we do in financial services are Excel spreadsheets and that sort of analysis. Consulting, I know the bread and butter of a lot of people who get recruited from INSEAD is in the consulting domain. I know it's going to have a huge impact there. So we can list those industries and we can think conceptually about knowledge production. That's definitely a huge first instance. I wouldn't stop there though. I would say it'll eventually find its way into what I'll call the physical world with real world AI. What do I mean by that? I mean robotics, essentially. The capacity to take that great intelligence and embed it or instantiate it in the world, typically through robots. So I think the humanoid robots, of course, have been the big topic of conversation. Tesla, Boston Scientific, other companies that are doing that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be at that level. Anything that physically interacts in a heavy industry context, in a manufacturing industry context, those companies have been using some AI solutions for a while. But I think generative AI, the capacity to adapt and generate new ideas and innovations in the physical world, is probably going to have a big application. It might be stage two, but I think it'll have a big application. Let me give I'll just say maybe one or two examples because I think it's a great way to open up our conversation. I'd love to hear what you think. One way that there are a lot of different strategies companies will use, but it's sometimes useful to take a look at the highest performing or most unique companies. That's one reason why I sat with some of these very strange but interesting companies. Let me bring up the example of Tesla. Now, it's interesting to bring up Tesla these days. You can look at it from so many different angles. It's like the proverbial elephant. I like to look at it from just the AI perspective. What is their AI strategy and how did that evolve actually over almost 10 years? Uh, they are an example of a strategy that I might call an iterative or an experimental strategy that unfolded over many years and gained momentum actually slowly and then quickly. So you can think, most people think of Tesla as just a car company, certainly an EV company, electric vehicles. But I think even from the early days, the leadership, Elon and others, saw that big car fleet that they had and were able to produce based on EVs as an opportunity to collect data. So very early on, added cameras, even to the car, even though it wasn't immediately useful. 3-4 years of cars with cameras driving around that aren't doing a lot for you. Eventually, they design autopilot, which does some basic things like parallel parks your car, and a few other things. And ultimately announced that the goal is full self-driving. Full self-driving has taken a long time, I think longer than anyone thought, but it appears to be relatively close to solved, and not just by Tesla. I would say there are a few companies that are very close. But then they don't stop with full self-driving. Full self-driving enables you to interact in the world, use AI in an embedded way, immediately start to transition to this idea of humanoid robots. So you can see this happening in stages. We have a fleet of cars that allow us to collect data about the world. We use that data for some minor AI solutions. Eventually self-driving. Self-driving is essentially movement with vision, which allows us to do robotics. Not that every company would be like Tesla, right? But this strategy of small project with some win that allows you to learn about AI, allows you to collect data, and then you can build on that momentum in that win. I think a strategy like that is potentially very useful for a lot of companies. Now, maybe they won't do cars and humanoid robots, but in all sorts of different corporate environments, you can imagine building that momentum, learning from AI, and adapting to the new technologies. Tesla radically changed the AI types of models that they use. When Transformers came out, they almost redid their entire AI, right? So they weren't the innovator there. That was Google and others, but they quickly adapted and tried to use that technology. So just to sum up, a lot of different industry applications, even in the real world. I think we can look at some of the top companies and see this momentum strategy, this flexible experimentation, as pretty useful. And I have one or two other examples like that, but let me stop there. What do you think, Kevin? Does that have echoes with things that you've seen, or you have other thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it does echo. I think within the sort of consulting area with AI, right? I think a lot of companies are thinking, how am I going to go through business model transformation, right, going forward? And I really think AI is about enabling that business model transformation. Like
Yes.
one thing I've seen to maybe the detriment of AI a little bit is often companies will go out, buy some really cool AI technology, and then force it into a use case. I actually think that's a horrible idea. I think the right way to think about this stuff is what is your business problem? What are you trying to solve? And then can AI help with that? And as someone who works in the AI space, I think the answer is sometimes AI is the answer, but sometimes AI is also not the answer, right? And I think it's important to kind of recognize when that difference actually happens. And sometimes if companies are thinking about cost, right, different regions of the world, then that equation is different. Because in a place maybe like a region like Asia, where the unit cost of labor, relatively speaking, is a bit less, sometimes it might make sense here to actually use people and kind of go through that route, as opposed to maybe another region where the cost dynamics make AI, at least from a cost perspective, the right way to do it, right? So I think the emphasis here should always be business model transformation. And then the question should be, does AI help me to enable me to do that? And I think once you see that match, then it becomes really interesting.
I think that's right on. I mean, in fact, I could just bring up a few studies. We've known for probably 15 years that most IT projects have negative ROI. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's also true, the best studies we have are AI in the automation domain. Most of those don't work either, particularly because you're just hiring a vendor, you're taking their solution, you're turning it on. You don't really get the value, right? There's not a lot of value there. The value is exactly where you're talking about. It's understanding your business deeply, seeing where the problems are, seeing where the bottlenecks might be, and then thinking creatively about how can I apply the new technology. So ironically, it's about the user, it's about the problem, it's about the business problem, and seeing if a technology solution can be applied. If you're lucky, it allows you to transform the business model. It doesn't always, but sometimes it's just a one-hit thing. But sometimes it does. Let me give one example, one other example, and this is probably one that's been talked about a lot, but we're seeing huge improvements, and that's the area of call centers. And I think in Asia, a couple countries are lucky to have the majority of call centers from the world, Philippines and India, South Asia in particular. This has been a huge industry. And very productive industry. I mean, they've developed routines and capabilities that are just incredibly effective. I've worked with a few of these companies. Well, that's been changing, and there's been some radical disruption due to Gen AI, particularly voice-based systems. One company that we studied well is this company Klarna. They are a SaaS company, fintech. So customer service and call centers are not their main issue, but they wanted a solution and they built their own AI-based system that allowed them to replace the majority of the agents, the customer service agents that they had in the company. I think upwards of 700. It's a huge impact. Basically, we're able to rewrite their business model and actually offer higher levels of customer service because the AI system can be so responsive. And I think everyone's seeing this, including the players of the big companies who do this. I recently saw the CEO of Tata Consultancy Services. This is TCS, one of the largest IT consultant services. They're deeply connected to the call center industry as well. Um, CEO said he basically thinks the call centers are going away. I mean, they'll be very minimal in the future. I don't know if I'd go that extreme, but when you hear it from someone who works intimately with these companies, I think it's something to take note of. So I think there will be functions that will be almost completely replaced by AI. Some companies will have to either transform their business model or they're in trouble. They're just frankly in trouble. And I don't think there's much to do about that. You can't really fight this trend. It's just incredibly effective in these domains. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I actually think there's an unprecedented opportunity for folks coming from business schools like INSEAD to really play a part in this AI revolution. As an educator and someone who's involved a lot on the education side with university students and also with companies as well and people working there, many people often come to me and say, hey, I can't program, I can't code, I'm not an engineer, I can't really be part of this, right? And just given, what we were just talking about with business model transformation, I think this is something where folks that have that business background or that subject matter expertise actually become really vital to the whole AI transformation, journey, right? And I hope this is something that for those people on our webinar today who are maybe a bit scared or a bit concerned, I think don't underestimate the value of your subject matter expertise that you've honed over 10, 15, 20 years. Because the AI comes in, but the AI needs to learn from somewhere, right? And I do think going forward, we're going to see quite a few hybrid sort of AI and human work models that I think will be interesting. And I think that's definitely something that we should chat about. So I think related to that, then, if alumni who are maybe on the webinar now are thinking about preparing themselves for sort of an AI-driven future where AI is going to become part of jobs and careers going forward, what are maybe some pieces of advice that you might have for them to reduce the fear but also make them see this as an opportunity that's exciting going forward?
Yeah, that's a big question. I guess my intuition is, of course, learn more. I would say that I'm an educator, but I think learning more makes you feel more capable, makes you see the opportunities, makes you more confident. Ironically, the things you are learning may not be the most practical things. Ironically, the value of learning is the confidence, the building up your capability to be able to assimilate information. Then when you go attack a specific problem, you'll find, oh, I need to learn a different code base or a different set of practices or a different set of use cases. But my prior learning helped me to be able to do that quickly. All right. So I sometimes hear from folks who say, I don't want to learn today's latest greatest AI framework or model because it's going to be obsolete tomorrow. Well, yes, it will be obsolete tomorrow, but the value of learning that will transfer when you go learn the new model. Sometimes it's specific to what's happening in your organization though. So I know a lot of people are already on the call, maybe holding mid-level or even senior level positions in the organization, and they're thinking about what can I do not only for myself and my career, but what good things can I do for the organization? How can I create value? And I found something which is, after looking at many cases, successes and failures, to be frank, about really getting value from AI in organizations, I found there's basically one big trick that seems to always work. So I thought I should share that right now, and that is super users. That's the best word I can use for it. Identify those people in the organization. It may be you, it may be someone else who is already using it intensely. Now, one thing we're finding, there have been some good studies on this, is a lot of people are using Gen AI in their organization and they're not telling others that they're using Gen AI. They're amping up their productivity, they're having great gains, they're impressing their boss, but the boss still thinks they're doing the work, right? That's okay, of course. What the organization needs to do is create a culture where those people feel proud and willing to talk about the tools that they're using. Because only by doing that will others start to learn. I think leaders have a responsibility to identify those people and give them the recognition and value and status that they need, but also recruit them maybe to form teams to share some of those learnings with others. In those cases where I've seen that happen, it almost becomes like a snowball rolling down the hill, right? You can see the value growing. Lots of people are learning the tools. And that original super user person doesn't need to worry that they'll be disvalued. They actually they become even more valued. They become very prominent in the organization. So it can just have such a nice self-reinforcing effect. It's not everything. You need to do a lot more for organizations are very complicated, and everyone knows that. But at least is a way to catalyze, way to jumpstart. That's at least one thing I've seen.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea, right? I mean, one of the services that we offer is also AI education for companies as well. And I see that theme that you mentioned, whereby for those workshops that I do for them, often they'll send their quote unquote AI champions there,
Yeah,
right? And they may not necessarily have the skills yet, but you can tell they're excited about it. They want to learn more. It's the right sort of, vessel might be the wrong word, but they're the right sort of transmission method throughout the rest of the organization. And I think when I do some of these workshops, I guess their enthusiasm is contagious, right? So they come in, they're excited. That makes me excited to do even a better job when we do the workshops as well. And you get the real sense that they're going to take the knowledge that they gain from there, combine it with their domain expertise, which is something I don't have, but they do, and then put those two things together and then disseminate it throughout the organization. So I definitely echo your sentiments in terms of the AI champion sort of model there. So I think
yeah,
that's definitely works. Okay, and then maybe just kind of related a bit on the education side, right? So
yeah.
obviously a lot of folks here have gone through either the MBA program or other programs at INSEAD. So given that you're teaching now, I'm curious, are there classes you're teaching, methods you're teaching? What are you doing using potentially either AI to do the teaching or AI to help with the content? What are maybe classes that you're teaching that you're finding traction with students now to help them out going forward?
Yeah, a lot of different things, as I'm sure you have some experience as well too, Kevin. So I guess I would divide my teaching into executive education, which is usually with companies or sometimes open enrollment programs, but usually directly with companies, or MBA degree programs. So on the executive education side, I can say that it's usually working with top executives and the issues are different, right? So the issue is these people do need some exposure to the tools themselves, which is often very motivating, but usually it's about gaining resources, mobilizing people, creating structures and teams, and then creating a culture where that becomes AI first. And I've seen that in all sorts of different industries. Of course, in Southeast Asia, we have a lot of financial services companies, so I end up spending a good chunk of time with those folks. But I would say anywhere from energy, oil companies, all the way to heavy industry, consumer packaged goods. It seems to be a similar sort of issues around how do I get the organization moving toward AI, and that happens in a kind of a traditional executive education format that INSEAD does. On the MBA side, I think something a bit more unique. So I've often taught digital strategy courses to our MBA. So some of them may be on the call now. They remember taking my course.
Mhm.
Um, and I used to teach a crypto course as well. I think I would have to say I mostly am all AI all the time now. I think I could probably just occupy 300% of my time with AI. There's just so much demand. So I teach a course I call AI entrepreneurship. And this has really been a change for me and the students. So I think in the old days, when you're a strategy prof, it's really about the frameworks and cases and doing that analysis, which I think is still useful. But in the world of AI, I think we need to change as educators and the participants as well. So what I do in the AI entrepreneurship course is it's really a practical course where I take folks who would normally be in a strategy course, typical future consultants and bankers, or other folks who will work in multinationals, and we build stuff. And it's amazing how you can build stuff. So I remember the first day I announced this, I said, we're throwing away the syllabus. Instead, your grade will depend on everyone here is going to build an app. And I got a lot of blank stares like, what? What is this guy doing? Okay. I said, well, it turns out 3 weeks ago, Cursor released software that allows you to build uh, mobile applications and other applications using human speech. And then along came Replit and others, right? So a lot of different software tools that allow people without coding experience to go build things. Now, I'm not going to say, you're building an app as, good as Instagram, but you can at least start to prototype. And that I think is incredibly powerful, right? In a series of 3, 4 days, people come back with some prototype of an app, and everyone in the class can discuss it, can try it, can download it to their phone or visit the website, right? And give feedback. And then you can have a very quick iteration cycle. And I found this has been pretty revolutionary for typical MBA student who may think they're mainly just going to do case analysis. Suddenly they're building stuff and they feel incredibly empowered. And like you said, Kevin, they suddenly feel like they can go become champions. When they get the job, they can say, okay, I'm taking a traditional consulting or banking job, but I built a couple apps. I at least know the process. I've been through maybe a design thinking or some other style of process, and I can build those prototypes. It really brings the strategy concepts, that we and technology strategy concepts that we have to life. You start to realize the challenges and the ease and the incredible power that you have with these tools. So I've just found that's been a great way to teach, to really have them do something practical and hands-on. And after 20 years of doing this, we can finally do it. I mean, it's literally been last year that we can put in MBAs in a class and have them build something. So that's really been a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. And I think this idea of no code and low code tools, where you don't need programming or you don't need coding to use it, is really changing the game. In fact, just as a quick shout out to the INSEAD Alumni Association in Hong Kong, but they recently here asked me to do a couple of workshops for INSEAD alumni in Hong Kong to literally do exactly that. It's a workshop on AI, come in, play around with the tools, and actually get a sense for what, this stuff actually is. And I noticed at the beginning, in the morning, everyone has a little bit of fear. A few folks are like, I don't know if I should really be here. But by the end of it, they were actually creating stuff. And I remember one person came up to me, senior alumni, and he said, you know what? I'm going to go home and show my kids something, right? Literally, I'm going to take the technology and I'm going to be the one showing them. So they actually use Replit. So one of the exercises was to use Replit to create the game Snake. So I'm sure some of the folks who might be a little bit older here remember the old Nokias where we had to play the Snake game. So we basically got them to use Replit to actually design the Snake game. People who couldn't code, couldn't program before, now could actually do that. And later on, I heard that their kids at home were fighting over playing Snake, which I think was a fantastic sort of end result for that. But I definitely think no code, low code tools, it's going to really help democratize a lot of this stuff. So I'm pretty excited about that. So Jason, speaking of the tools, right? I think one of the recent kind of big pieces of news in the area of AI was DeepSeek, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are talking about this. I see also a lot of questions from our participants here. So with the emergence sort of, with DeepSeek from China in recent weeks, I'm also curious, how do you see sort of large language models and maybe AI generally evolving globally? And what do you think that means for business and innovation as these architecture sort of, or newer architectures sort of come up and become a little bit more relevant going forward?
Yeah, this has been quite a big piece of news, right? And it had an effect on the market and everything, right? So, yeah, so in fact, this used to be my bread and butter, studying big techs and their strategies, their tech strategies, and their different strategies that the companies are taking. And I've written some cases about it. And DeepSeek, in some sense, was surprising. In another sense, it was just an extension of some trends that we've understood for a while. I think we mostly thought, or at least I'll say the public consciousness seems to have mostly been about US companies, right? It's OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, maybe Mistral was in there, but mostly, it unfortunately, has been mostly about US companies. And I think in fairness to them, they were putting in the big investments and were really at the forefront. But I think what DeepSeek and the R1 model, what it really did is it surprised the broader, not just the AI community who may have known about them, but the broader community of investors and users of these models, because the model was able to basically match the capabilities of ChatGPT o1, at least in reasoning ability. And I think that's probably been proven. The bigger news was probably that they did it at a much cheaper cost, or at least that's what was reported. There is some debate about that. There was a claim originally that they trained this off of $6 million in hardware. I think that's probably, we have good evidence that's not completely true. There are probably some NVIDIA H100s in there somewhere. So maybe we don't believe that anymore, but the market reacted dramatically because the idea is that this reduction in cost, it used to be these models took hundreds of billions in some cases to train, at least ChatGPT. And if you could do it for $6 million, this is revolutionary. Frankly, probably good for all the rest of us, for humanity, for customers, for users of AI, but not particularly good for, well, the US big techs or NVIDIA, because of course NVIDIA is supplying these GPUs, and if you can do it with much less GPUs, it's not good for their business. We probably realize that I think most analysis I've read, and I believe, is probably not $6 million. It was much higher. However, it was cheaper. And this is something that we should have, in some sense, expected. This is an inevitable technological trend that not only will these models become more capable, that it will happen at cheaper cost. In other words, the value for all of us will explode if it continues to operate on that exponential part of the S curve, like other digital technologies. So, but probably what it really reminds us is this is going to be a global arms race for AI. And it's not just US, it'll certainly be China. And then we can discuss other countries and where they are, but at least a duopoly, at least two countries that are going to be going head to head. Right around the same time, the US announced its Stargate initiative, which would mobilize, again, upwards of $1 trillion, it seems, maybe half a trillion. OpenAI, Oracle, and investment from SoftBank to try to secure AI dominance in the US. So I have no doubt investment levels will increase, even if effectiveness and cost continues to go down. At the same time, I would imagine Chinese companies are investing, and probably with some government support. But I think what may have been missed in this is not just the US versus China angle, which I think a lot of us living in this region, we certainly are thinking about. It's on our minds probably every day. It's that DeepSeek wasn't just a Chinese model. It's an open source model. If this was a win, it was probably a huge win for open source, because any of us can download this model to our computer, or if you have a big enough phone, to your phone. Okay, it's literally at that scale. And when that happens, that's going to just democratize and distribution of AI. Okay, so DeepSeek is in a line of open source models. We probably need to give credit to Facebook, Meta, their Llama models, who really started a huge wave, I think, of investment in open source. So probably, as a technologist, the real competition I'm looking for is for the closed versus the open models. And what will the technological capabilities be? I honestly don't know. I think it'll be hard to predict. Will the closed models pull away in terms of technological capability? Just recently, OpenAI released their O3 model. It certainly is higher performance. So will an open model come to catch up in time, or will there always be that lag? Or will eventually open models reign supreme? There's an argument for that too, that open models mobilize resources and lots of innovative, creative minds to work on a problem. And in some industries, open source models have become dominant. I'm thinking of things like Linux and other platforms where open source software is supreme. So there is the geopolitical angle for sure. I don't think we could ignore it. But I think the closed and open is probably the one that will have the biggest impact on industry and people, right? Depending on who wins the battle, the closed versus the open models will probably have a big impact on where this technology is applied. Well, at least that's my initial perspective on DeepSeek. There's probably a lot more to say. Being in Hong Kong, what are your thoughts? I'm sure it was quite reported news there when it happened.
Yeah, for sure. I think your framing of open source versus closed source, I think is a right way to look at it though. Because I do think, going forward, the question for a lot of companies, and I think this is probably true for people as well, is going to be what is the right tool to use for which situation, right? Because I think even when you're talking about open source versus closed source, my sense is there's going to be some bells and whistles on the closed source stuff that they're going to kind of put in to justify either charging people for it or, to justify their R&D costs, right? So the question I think is, or I think the way it'll go is there won't be one perfect model that can do absolutely everything. It's rather going to be a toolbox. And I think this is why it's so important for, everyone, here, but just generally as well, to get a sense for what these models can do. And I think, Jason, you and me can sit here and talk about the pros and cons, But I think there's no substitute for people actually kind of getting in the driver's seat and taking a bunch of these tools for a test run, right? And what I do think is useful to get a better sense of this is that there are some platforms out there where you can use different large language models on the same platform, and then you can compare the different output. So in Hong Kong, for example, yeah, we were using something here called POE, so for Platform for Open Exploration. And the good thing about POE is you can use multiple LLMs and multiple image models in the same platform. So you put in a prompt to, let's say, large language model A, and then it gives you the output. And then just below it, it says compare, and you can give it to large language model B. So it makes that process of giving the same prompt to two different LLMs pretty easy. And then you as a user can think about, okay, which one was better here? And in the future, you can then think about or keep in mind that for this specific situation, this tool worked well. So I think one of the skills that we are seeing now in education is how do I use these tools? And I think we do need to train people and have them think about it. But I think the next level of skill going forward is going to be in this massive toolbox. Can you be the person who knows which is the right tool? And so for those people who are thinking about, hey, how do I develop my skills? How do I stay relevant in a world with AI going forward? If you can be the person to pick up the right tool, I think that is huge, right? If I think of, like a plumber, right, versus me, we can both have the same toolbox, but why is a plumber better than me? Well, the plumber knows that if this type of pipe is bursting, he pulls out this type of wrench, and in 2 minutes it's done. Right? Whereas someone like me tries to take every type of wrench and kind of fix it, and by that time the kitchen's probably flooded anyway. Right. So I think this is going to be a really important skill for a lot of people going forward. So something else I would encourage people today on the call would be to do is try and take these models for a spin. Right? Take the open source models, DeepSeek, try to use it. Take the OpenAI, ChatGPTs of the world, use them too, and then you'll get a sense based on your domain expertise, which one is good for the things that you do. Because what's right for Jason and what's right for Kevin might actually be different, right? And this is something that I think is really important for people to think about going forward. Okay.
I think that's very nice. I'm often I kind of chuckle at this because I remember as a tech strategist, we're often wondering, where is the value in the value chain? Is it the foundational model? Is it the application? Is the data provider the cloud? Huge arguments. I remember in the early days, there was a lot of disparagement of GPT wrappers. This idea that you're building an application on someone else's big model and ChatGPT would gobble up all the value. That still may be part of our world. I don't doubt that's true. But this announcement made us realize actually there are a lot of different. There is a toolbox. As buyers or shoppers, we have a lot of different models to choose from. Many of the capabilities will be commoditized. In those cases, you want something cheap, easy, maybe even free. Although some applications may need that additional intelligence that you're getting from the latest and greatest model. But I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be a question of what is your use case. And ironically, those wrappers may end up being the most valuable thing. I don't call them wrappers. I think they're important business use cases where you're building a customer base that is sticky, right? And in those cases, sometimes you may be able to swap out the models, right? In some cases. So, it's going to be interesting to see where does the value lie. I don't doubt OpenAI is going to make their money. I have no worry about it. But I really think some interesting businesses on the application side are going to be built and they will end up being pretty sticky.
Sounds great. So I'm looking at the questions that we're getting, and one of them I think is actually quite interesting here. It's from Burhanatin, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name there. But we've talked a lot about what are industries that are going to benefit from AI. Where are they going to be seen? But the interesting question here is which industries will see potentially the least amount of impact in sort of the midterm, 5 to 10 years. I think that's also an interesting thing to think about. So just curious your perspective on that one.
Yeah, so although I am a big proponent of robotics, I do believe that the physical industries will be longer to adopt. Even if the solutions are ready, we're not going to have enough robots to replace every bit of, I'll call it skilled labor. And so let me take the classic examples everyone mentions. I think that there is truth in it. Plumbers, electricians, these sorts of professions that you build, nothing to disparage on plumbers and electricians. They build up skill, at least in most countries, they are licensed, and that skill is difficult, and often it requires them getting into places that are very difficult for a robot to get into, right? So that combination of skill, physicality, and their ability to adapt to many different types of scenarios, I think will make it resistant to AI, at least, as you said, in the midterm, for a while.
Mhm.
I also think that, so that's at an occupational level. I think you can translate a similar idea to things like manufacturing. So I think manufacturing will have a robotic revolution, no doubt about it, especially that sort of manufacturing that happens at scale. I don't know if I'm seeing Shenzhen across the what, maybe not. It's a part of Hong Kong across the waterway, but you're very close to it there, Kevin. I mean, I'm sure robotics will come in to those factories if they haven't already in a huge way. But there will be, I think, some mid-level manufacturing that may be resistant to that. Things that especially require a lot of customization, a lot of quick changes, where human beings are just very effective at making those changes and rewiring things. Now, not to say that AI can't be useful there, but those people who are very good at that, and they're in different regions, will likely, I think, hold on to their competitive advantage. And there might be some companies that are, particularly good at that stick around for quite a while. That's at least a projection. I don't think I'm saying anything innovative there. I think a lot of us have that gut feeling. Versus the other side of things, those professions that are all about content generation, especially if it's textual. I'm a little worried about those professions. I'm not to say that all the people will go away, but that there will be a big transformation, a big disruption with AI.
And I think related to your thoughts on the occupation side, something I think might be again helpful for people when they're thinking about the effect on their occupation is I think to potentially realize that a lot of the AI that's coming in there, Gen AI, but also robotics like you're talking about, I think the objective behind a lot of that is not necessarily job automation, but more about task automation, right? So I'd encourage people, if you're again in that fear camp, think about your job and divide or think about what are the tasks that comprise of your job. And I think the effect that we're going to see is that AI comes in, takes away the easy to automate stuff, right? And then that leaves us with the harder to automate stuff, meaning that going forward, the question for HR organizations is going to be if there's let's say, for example, a job with 10 tasks, seven of them are easy to automate. The remaining three, do we get our people to 100% spend their time on the remaining three, or do we add new tasks into that job? So I think we are going to see some job evolution, which I think is interesting. The other piece that unfortunately I think we haven't talked about too much is also what are new jobs that are going to be created going forward? Because that's
Mhm.
another area I'm very excited about. Maybe less so for dinosaurs like myself, but more so for undergrads who are coming out of school now, who are very interested in the sort of the AI and tech area. And I mean that as a opportunity for those younger folks, but I also think people at all stages of their career. We are going to see new roles, new jobs pop up as well. I mean, I see these days JDs for folks like AI ethicists, right? So people who specialize on sort of the moral, ethical applications of AI within companies. And I think that's an example of a new role that today doesn't exist, but that tomorrow could, right? So I think the question for many of us is going to be, how do we prepare ourselves for job evolution or new job creation? And like you said, I think it's really hard to predict what comes going forward. But I think one of the ways I think we can sort of future proof ourselves a little bit is to get good at the things that are hard to automate, right? So those skill sets, I think human to human interaction pops up in there, things like empathy, storytelling, critical thinking. I think these are ironically some of the things you can learn at MBA school too, which is fantastic, right? And so I do think education kind of moves in that direction a little bit. And I'm on a few of the boards for kind of universities in Hong Kong, and they've been thinking about that. Like, how should curriculum
Cool.
change and what should we do? And I think that will definitely be quite useful for people, I think, going forward. So I'm excited about that area. And so for people who are afraid on the call, really think about what are those things that are hard to automate. And maybe one caveat with that, because I feel like if people think about what's hard to automate today, and then 5 years from now they might still get fired, I think they need to think about, well, how is AI evolving as well? Because what's hard to automate today might become easy to automate tomorrow.
That's right.
So from a professional development standpoint, I encourage everyone here to keep in mind what is hard to automate today and keep revisiting that list. Because as AI changes, that list will change. And hopefully that can then guide your continuous learning going forward. Because, Jason, I really appreciate what you said before about the continuous learning part. And now more so than ever, we're going to have to continuously learn because the AI is going to evolve too. So for us to be constantly good complements to the AI, we've also got to continuously learn and consistently get good at the things that are hard to automate to help for both job evolution and also new job creation as well.
I like that framing a lot, Kevin. That's similar to how I think about it. with tasks being the real focus and jobs can be reorganized around tasks. I think that's the right framing. When it comes to new jobs, I had a thought about a year and a half ago, and that's why I reframed some of my teaching that the big skill that's hard to automate, I think, is actually entrepreneurship. It's
Okay.
seeing the opportunity and then trying to build something around it. What's interesting about that, the entrepreneurship, let's call it the value chain, is you've probably heard ever since Edison, the famous Edison quote, that invention is, what is it, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Now, I think that equation has shifted because AI can do a lot of the perspiration, can do a lot of the hard work. So, in fact, we need to get better at the inspiration, ironically, like identifying the opportunity, thinking about who the customer is, what is the solution we could offer them, because the AI can increasingly help us with the execution, part of that. So what I think what that does, in the value chain is it increases the value of being an entrepreneur, as someone who can identify opportunities and come up with plans and try to go execute those plans. I think we're probably see a lot more entrepreneurship. I don't mean that just in terms of startups and new ventures, although I think we'll see a lot of that. I mean in terms of corporate entrepreneurship or career entrepreneurship. One solution to, okay, I'm learning some new technology. Maybe it's right for the next 2 years, but it's going to go away and I'm going to get replaced. One solution to that problem is make a new job. Okay, make
Yeah.
a new task. Find that new opportunity. And it could just be that our idea of a career just changes. It's someone who's launched, basically everyone becomes a serial entrepreneur, right? I go from one opportunity to the next. It might be in the context of one or a few companies, but really we all need to take responsibility for identifying those opportunities and using the latest, greatest technologies to go execute and do cool things that give us some sense of pride and recognition for our careers. So yeah, so I'm with you on this. Maybe it's my bias as a professor of entrepreneurship in my title, but I think it's really going to be about entrepreneurship.
All right, fantastic. And then, Jason, we've got one question from an area we've not touched today. So I did want to actually look at that one. So a question here from Andreas, which is, where are we heading in terms of regulating AI? Because we've always talked about new business models, a lot of new stuff is happening. And I think typically or often, regulation often plays catch up, right? And I think with AI moving so fast, that catch up gap becomes quite big. So I think I'm curious, and it's a great question. It's like, what's your thoughts just in terms of regulation, and just wanted to get your perspective on that.
I hate to end it on a political note, but it has to be brought up. It will depend on the region very clearly. I would have said the US, 6 months ago, I would have said certainly the US will be the freest or be the place where a lot of AI entrepreneurship would happen. That's only been magnified with the election of the new president. I think he's sent a clear signal. He actually canceled the Biden administration's regulations around AI. Right now, there's nothing to replace it. So what it seems to be is a bit of a laissez-faire environment for AI. I'll just put it that way. Now I won't say much about China because I think that's a very institutionally specific, but I'll say something about Europe just because, obviously INSEAD, we have historic roots there and our biggest campus there. Europe, of course, has taken a more regulatory, intense regulation towards AI. However, I'm actually fairly optimistic that some of those, not that regulation will go away in Europe, but that it can be revised. It can actually become more open, especially when and I think many European leaders have realized they are falling behind essentially as a continent compared to the US and China. I don't think Europe wants to be there. I think the leaders of Europe are starting to have a unified vision that they need to do something. I'm quite hopeful that those, not just the regulations, but the environment can become more conducive, particularly because this is going to be the place where most value and innovation and growth for society is developed. And I don't think Europe wants to be left out of that. At least I'll end with that optimistic note about Europe. I actually am quite hopeful. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing. I've actually really enjoyed the conversation, Jason. Thanks for sharing your perspective on a lot of different areas. I'd also like to thank all the participants today. There were some fantastic questions. I think we could have gone on for many, many more hours, but unfortunately, I think we do have to cut it in the interest of time. So I just wanted to also say, yeah, just thanks to everyone organizing as well. A final few words here. We just want to improve. So also, as you leave the webinar, feel free to help us with rating the webinar when you log out. And that's going to help us for future lifelong learning webinars, making those better going forward. And also do follow our Lifelong Learning LinkedIn page which I think has a lot of information about future events that are coming up. So thank you again very much, everybody, for spending your evening, morning, or afternoon with us. And we've both really enjoyed the conversation today.
And I'll also add my thanks to you, Kevin, for some terrific moderating and a really fun conversation. To everyone else at INSEAD involved in lifelong learning and in the organization of these, and especially also to our audience and the participants here. We received so many terrific questions. It was actually really inspiring for us to chat about them. We can only choose a few, of course, but it's been really fun. So thanks, everyone. It's been great.